The Hidden Heiress. Part 1. The paper on the table. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the air purifier. It was a high-end unit in Shanghai's Jing'an district, overlooking a skyline that glittered like spilled diamonds. Everything in the home was curated. The muted gray linens, the minimalist ceramic vases, and the woman sitting at the dining table. Clara looked exactly as she had for the 3 years of their marriage, composed, quiet, and profoundly adequate. When the door clicked open, Julian walked in, tossing his Tom Ford blazer onto the sofa. He didn't look at her. He never did, not immediately. He was the VP of operations at Blackwood Holdings, a man whose time was measured in basis points and venture capital. The gala ran late, Julian said, loosening his tie. Did you handle the RSVP for the Henderson wedding? My mother is asking. I didn't, Clara said. Her voice was a calm lake. Julian paused, his fingers frozen on his collar. He turned, a frown etching into his handsome, tired face. It's a simple task, Clara. We discussed this. We didn't discuss it, she corrected gently. You told me to do it. There's a difference. She pushed a manila envelope across the polished marble table. Julian glanced at it, then back at her. He expected a gift, perhaps a brochure for a vacation she wanted to take to make up for his absence. Instead, he saw the bold, black characters of a legal filing, topped with the English translation, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Julian laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but one of genuine confusion. Is this a joke? Because of the Henderson RSVP? Clara, if you're feeling neglected, we can hire a therapist. We can go to Bali for a week. I don't want Bali, Julian. And I've already signed. You have nothing, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the negotiator again. The prenup was ironclad. You came into this marriage with a suitcase and a teaching degree. If you walk out that door, you're back to living in a shared flat in the outskirts. Do you even remember what it's like to take the subway at rush hour? Clara stood up. For the first time, Julian noticed she wasn't wearing the diamond pendant he'd bought her for their anniversary. She was wearing a simple, dark silk blouse and slacks. She looked expensive, not because of what she wore, but because of how she stood. I remember the subway, she said, a small, witty smile playing on her lips. But I think I'll be taking a private car from now on. Part 2. The Boardroom Ghost. 3 days later, the headquarters of Sheng Power Group, the largest energy conglomerate in Asia, was in a state of controlled panic. The founding chairman, the legendary Arthur Sheng, had announced his retirement. The successor, his elusive daughter who had been studying abroad for 5 years, was arriving for the emergency board meeting. Julian was there, too. Blackwood Holdings was a minority stakeholder, and he had been sent to represent his firm. He sat in the back of the mahogany-clad room, feeling the tension. I heard she's a shark, whispered Mark, Julian's colleague. Trained in London, worked undercover in logistics for 2 years. They say she's ruthless. She's a socialite with a legacy, Julian dismissed, though he felt a strange knot in his stomach. He was still reeling from Clara's departure. She had vanished. No calls, no social media updates. Her side of the closet was empty. The double doors at the front of the room swung open. The room went silent. A woman walked in, flanked by 4 lawyers and the chairman's personal secretary. She was in a tailored white power suit, her hair slicked back into a sharp ponytail. She moved with a predatory grace that made the air in the room feel thin. Julian's pen hit the floor. It was Clara. But it wasn't the Clara who made him tea and apologized for the rain. This woman looked at the room of powerful men as if they were pieces on a chessboard she had already solved. She took the seat at the head of the table. She didn't look at Julian, but she knew exactly where he was sitting. Good morning, gentlemen, she said. Her voice was no longer a calm lake. It was the ocean. I am Clara Sheng. Let's talk about why your Q3 projections are a fantasy. Part 3. The realization. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Clara dismantled 3 different proposals with a surgical precision that left the room stunned. She knew the numbers better than the accountants. She knew the supply chain leaks better than the foreman. As the meeting adjourned, Julian stood by the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. He waited until the room cleared, until only she remained, sipping a glass of sparkling water. "Clara," he breathed. She looked up. Her eyes were cool, professional. "Mr. Vance, I believe Blackwood Holdings has some explaining to do regarding the offshore accounts. You have until Friday." "Why?" Julian stepped forward, his voice cracking. 3 years. You cooked dinner. You listened to me complain about my boss. You played the role of the perfect, simple wife. Why the lie?" Clara set the glass down. "It wasn't a lie, Julian. It was a test. My father wanted me to know what people are like when they think I have nothing to offer them. He wanted me to see the world without the Sheng name." She walked toward him, stopping just inches away. The scent of her perfume, something rare and woody, hit him. "And what did you learn?" Julian asked. "I learned that you are a very talented businessman," she said softly. "But I also learned that you only love things you can own. And you could never own me. You didn't even notice when I stopped being a person to you and started being a piece of furniture." "Clara, I can change. We can." "The car is waiting, Julian," she interrupted, checking her watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than his apartment. "And by the way, I didn't just file for divorce. I bought the debt on your firm's latest acquisition this morning. Technically, I'm not just your ex-wife now. I'm your boss's biggest creditor." She turned and walked out, the click of her heels echoing like a countdown. Julian stood in the empty boardroom of the empire he had spent his life trying to impress, realizing he had spent 3 years sharing a bed with the one person who could destroy it all, and he had never even asked her what her favorite color was. The transition from husband of the year to persona non grata happened with the speed of a market crash. For Julian, the humbling wasn't a single blow, it was 1,000 paper cuts delivered in the air-conditioned hallways of Shanghai's elite. Part 4. The Glass Ceiling. 2 weeks after the boardroom revelation, the Emerald Gala was held at the Peninsula. It was the social event of the season. In the past, Julian would have arrived with Clara on his arm, the quiet, pretty accessory who stayed in the shadows while he networked. Tonight, he arrived alone, and the shadows had moved. As he stepped into the ballroom, the conversation didn't stop, but the direction of it shifted. He saw the CEO of a major tech firm, a man who usually slapped Julian on the back, suddenly find a very interesting speck of dust on his tuxedo sleeve as Julian approached. "Arthur," Julian said, reaching out a hand. "Julian. Busy night, isn't it?" Arthur didn't shake the hand. He adjusted his cufflinks. "I heard about the restructuring at Blackwood. Tough luck. I suppose when the Sheng Group pulls their credit line, the floor gets a bit shaky." "We're managing," Julian said, his throat dry. "Are you?" "I heard Clara personally sign the audit request." Arthur offered a thin, pitying smile. "You know, we all wondered why a woman like that was playing house in a Jingen apartment. We thought she was eccentric. Turns out, she was just slumming it." The word slumming hit Julian like a physical punch. His life, his hard-earned, high-velocity career, was her version of roughing it. Then, the room truly went silent. The grand staircase buzzed. Clara appeared, not in the modest silk she used to wear, but in a structured, midnight blue gown that looked like it was woven from the night sky itself. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her was Liam Thorne, the heir to a shipping empire and a man Julian had spent years trying to get a meeting with. Liam was leaning in, laughing at something Clara said. He looked at her with a terrifying level of respect. Julian found himself moving toward them before he could stop himself. It was a reflex, the husband's instinct to reclaim his place. "Clara," he said, intercepting them near the champagne tower. Liam Thorne paused, his eyes raking over Julian with the clinical indifference one might show a waiter with the wrong order. "And you are?" "Julian Vance." "He's a business associate of my father's," Clara interrupted smoothly. She didn't say husband. She didn't even say ex. She categorized him as a footnote in a ledger. "Julian, you remember Liam. He's helping me oversee the port expansion. Clara, can we talk? Privately?" Julian's voice was too loud. A few socialites turned their heads, sensing blood in the water. Clara took a sip of her drink, her expression unreadable. Anything you have to say can be said through my counsel, or perhaps at the creditors' meeting on Tuesday. I'm quite booked until then. I didn't know, Julian whispered, desperation leaking through. If I had known who you were. That's the point, Julian, she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal silk. If you had known I was a Sheng, you would have been the perfect husband. You would have listened to my dreams, bought me the right flowers, and respected my mind. But I wanted a man who would do those things when he thought I was just a teacher from the suburbs. She leaned closer, the scent of sandalwood and power enveloping him. You failed the only test that mattered. Now, please move. You're blocking the path to the stage. As she walked past, Liam Thorne gave Julian a brief, mocking nod. Julian stood frozen as the crowd surged forward to follow her, leaving him in a pocket of empty space. He was a ghost in his own social circle. Part 5. Moving on. The moving on didn't happen in a ballroom. It happened 6 months later in a small, nondescript noodle shop in a part of the city Julian used to avoid. Julian had lost his VP title. When the Sheng Group tightened the screws, Blackwood Holdings had restructured him out of a job to appease their new creditors. He was working now as a mid-level consultant for a boutique firm. No driver.
No Tom Ford suites.
Just a silver Volkswagen and a sensible watch. He was eating his beef noodles when he saw a familiar black Bentley pull up to the curb outside. Clara stepped out. She was dressed in a simple trench coat, her hair down. She looked tired, but vibrant. She wasn't there for him. She was there to pick up an order from the shop next door, a famous bakery she used to talk about when they were married. He had always told her it wasn't worth the drive. He walked out of the noodle shop just as she was getting back into the car. Clara, he called out. She stopped, her hand on the door. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the slightly frayed collar of his shirt and the way he held his own umbrella.
Julian, she said.
There was no malice in her voice anymore. Just a polite, distant recognition. I went to that bakery, he said, gesturing to the box in her hand. The one you liked. I finally tried the almond tarts. You were right. They're incredible. Clara smiled. It wasn't the shark-like smile of the chairwoman, nor was it the dutiful smile of the wife. It was a smile of a woman who had moved so far past him that he was no longer a threat or a regret. He was just a person she once knew. I'm glad you liked them, she said. I'm sorry, he said. It was the first time he had said it without wanting something in return. For everything. I didn't see you. I see that now. Clara nodded slowly. Apology accepted, Julian. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But for what it's worth, you look much more like yourself in that shirt than you ever did in those suits. She got into the car. The door closed with a muffled, expensive thud. Julian stood on the sidewalk as the Bentley merged into the sea of Shanghai traffic. He didn't watch it until it disappeared. Instead, he turned around, walked back to his modest car, and started his own engine. She had her empire. He finally had his reality. The final triumph wasn't a shout. It was the sound of a digital clock ticking toward zero in a room where several men were sweating through their $5,000 shirts. Part 6. The Reckoning. The Sheng Power Group boardroom felt like a courtroom. Arthur Sheng had officially stepped down, leaving a vacuum that the old guard, the directors who had sat on the board since the 1990s, intended to fill with one of their own. Marcus Vane, a silver-haired director with a penchant for offshore tax havens and a deep-seated resentment for the girl, leaned back in his chair. Clara, dear, Marcus said, his voice dripping with paternalistic venom. You've had your 6 months of fun. You've audited the books, you've fired a few mid-level managers, and you've intimidated your ex-husband. But the institutional investors are nervous.
They want a steady hand.
Someone with experience. Clara sat at the head of the table, her hands folded over a single leather-bound folder. By experience, Marcus, do you mean the $30 million currently sitting in a shell company in the Cayman Islands? The one linked to the logistics overages from the Qingdao port project. The room went cold. Marcus's smug expression didn't just fade, it disintegrated. I don't know what you're. I didn't spend 3 years playing the quiet wife because I was bored, Marcus, Clara interrupted. Her voice was conversational, almost light. I spent those 3 years learning how men like you hide things. I watched Julian's firm. I watched how you all whispered at the galas. I learned the language of the old guard. It's the language of entitlement and sloppy paperwork. She flipped open the folder. Inside were color-coded spreadsheets, the kind of forensic accounting that took years to build and seconds to destroy a career. You thought I was the hidden heiress, a prize to be won or a child to be managed, she said, standing up. But I am the daughter of Arthur Sheng. My father built this company with a hammer. I intend to run it with a scalpel. She slid a document across the table toward Marcus. That is your resignation. Effective immediately. If you sign it, the audit remains internal. If you don't, the SEC and the Shanghai Public Security Bureau are downstairs. They've been waiting for my signal for the last 20 minutes. The other 4 directors looked at each other. They saw the writing on the wall. Clara wasn't just holding the folder, she was holding their entire legacies. One by one, they looked away. They had underestimated her for 3 years because she had been kind, because she had been quiet, and because she was a woman. Marcus grabbed a pen. His hand shook so violently, he nearly tore the paper. Once the signatures were collected, Clara gathered the folders. She didn't gloat.
She didn't need to.
The silence in the room was the greatest applause she could ever receive. Part 7. The View from the Top. An hour later, Clara stood on the balcony of the penthouse office. The Shanghai skyline was a neon tapestry of blue, gold, and red. The door opened. It was her father's former secretary, now her chief of staff. The board is neutralized, ma'am. The market opened 5 minutes ago, and the stock is already up 4% on the news of the leadership change. Good, Clara said, not turning around. There was a delivery for you, the assistant added, placing a small white box on the desk. From an anonymous sender. No note. Clara walked over and opened the box. Inside was a single almond tart from the bakery she loved. It was still warm. She looked at the tart for a long moment. She didn't feel sadness or even nostalgia. She felt a strange sense of closure. She picked up the tart, took a single, deliberate bite, and then tossed the rest into the bin. The past was a delicious memory, but it was no longer her sustenance. She walked back to her desk, sat in the chair that once belonged to a giant, and pressed the intercom. Schedule the meeting with the European Green Energy Consortium, Clara, Sheng said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. It's time we showed them what this company can really do. She was no longer the girl who filed for divorce. She was the woman who had redefined the world that tried to diminish her.